There we go. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that are watching online on our YouTube channel after the fact, we welcome you as well. Today's session is focused on the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, which was just passed on July 11th. So new Housing Act, a lot in it. We have a really great slate of presenters here today to give us an overview of the act, the process then, and how we get to rulemaking, and really what it means for our municipal and nonprofit partners and anybody interested in the topic. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank some of our co-sponsors on this. First, the Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. I know Andrew Baumberger and his team's on, so thank you to Andrew and his team. And also Margaret Parsons from the Greater Harrisburg Association of Realtors for helping us put the program together. So, Andrew, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say from Tri-County side?
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. Nothing major. I just want to thank everyone, Kirk, for you and your team pulling this together kind of so quickly. Leah, Elaine, and Mary for, lending us their expertise here. And then, of course, everybody else online for attending. I think I'm not alone in knowing that this is going to be a very informative session here. So thanks again to everyone.
Yep. Margaret, anything from GHAR?
I'll just echo what Andrew said and just thank you for putting this together. And I think it's going to be a very informative event for everyone, all our municipal partners. So thank you.
Okay, great. So what I was saying while I was muted was way back when my career first started, housing was one of these issues that kind of came to the forefront of planning. And I always struggled with, how can really planning impact housing? There's housing affordability, supply issues, availability issues that are out there. And it always seemed to be like one of those issues that came up, but it was really struggled to do anything about. So, on July 11th, we had this new Road to Housing Act that was passed. A lot of opportunity there, but I think there's a lot of other issues that need to be worked out before we see what was proposed in the act that really seen hitting the streets of our communities. So today we have three presenters that'll go over various aspects of the act, talk about the rulemaking process, and then finally, really, what do you as municipal partners and even nonprofit partners, I know some of you are on today, what do we need to do to move this thing ahead? So what we'll start off with, we have Mary Kuna, who's the Executive Director of the Cumberland County Housing and Redevelopment Authority. She'll be giving us an overview of the act, what's in there, what are some of the major programs, provisions that we'll find in it. Then we'll go on to Elaine Weiss. She's with the National Association of Realtors in Washington. She'll be talking a little bit about the rulemaking process. How do we take what's in the act and actually make rules and programs and allocate money to it so that everything that's said in the act or the goals of the act, how we can make those a reality. And then we'll close out with Leah Eppinger. She's the director of the Dauphin County Housing Authority, and she's really going to be hitting what municipalities need to know about the act and how to bring some of these things home to your communities. So at the end of it, then we have about 15 minutes for questions. We asked each presenter to keep it about 15 minutes. We'll have some time at the end for questions. And again, we have this posted out on our YouTube channel. Those watching online, if you have questions that obviously you couldn't ask during the live session, please put those in the chat. Be glad to get as many answers that back out to our communities as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary. Mary, if you want to share your screen and take it over from here, have at it.
All right, let's do this. And hopefully we'll go there. All right. Everybody see that? As long as we are good. Okay. So let's just minimize everybody. All right. So what you'll see, particularly in this act, is the idea was not necessarily about mandates as much as it is about this idea of creating opportunity. So the 21st Century Road to Housing Act really modernizes existing programs. You'll hear a lot of pilot programs introduced in the act. There's focus on financing tools. So I'd say your three really key themes here. It's to increase the supply of housing throughout the country. It's to modernize federal programs. I know many of you deal with CDBG, so Community Development Block Grants, the Home Program. Some of you are realtors I saw coming online who are dealing with FHA lending. Some might be dealing with the USDA. A lot of those programs have not been modernized. or looked at in their totality. So this actually took a look at all those programs and gave a new look and some new opportunities to use them for creating those housing supplies. And then again, it's about efficiency. So some of the things you'll hear about are, if you're eligible for one federal program, or if one federal program has done an inspection, theoretically, does the other one need to? So really was the focus. So again, housing supply, modernizing, and efficiency. So there are over 1,200 sections to this act. I'm really going to touch on some of the more, I would say, important ones for municipalities and our local governments. So Title I of this, I would say this is really about opportunities for housing and building smarter, let's say. So for everyone here, it would be creating basically a database of publicly owned land. That's one of the sections. There's a section about creating a pilot program to increase small dollar mortgages. There is some information about even streamlining the National Environmental Policy Act when it comes to construction projects. In addition to that, HUD is going to develop a best framework when it comes to zoning and land use policies. That would be to help communities overcome barriers for housing development. I know our planning department here in Cumberland County, and Kirk and his team do a lot to create model ordinances, but again, you're thinking this is broad throughout the nation, and some communities do not have the talent we have in Cumberland County. So it would be creating that framework. When it comes to the second part of the act, and there are 10, we're talking about really building more, modernizing development. So big thing is updating existing programs. So home and CDBG, those programs have always been, they're designed to assist in the building of housing, but there are areas that could be expanded. And so this act really focuses on changing those things and allowing other uses of those funds, again, all housing related. There is a section about the Whole Homes Repair Act. So the state of Pennsylvania, I believe, is very proud because this is an act that we had here, our state initiated, and it looks like a pilot program will be created that is very similar to the one that existed here in PA. Think home rehab. That is essentially what this would be. And then there's also some additions that would include cutting red tape for environmental reviews. For anyone who has dealt with environmental reviews, sometimes that can bog down projects, particularly construction projects. Environmental reviews tend to be a bit challenging and lengthy if you are building housing. In addition to that, there's some grants going to be related to a pilot program that would be for regional housing planning and community development activities. There's mentioned in here an innovation fund. So again, funding for communities to build more housing supply. So, and then allowing a grant to help create pre-approved housing designs. So we're talking about, again, that idea of efficiency and modernizing. So I'll go on to say our next one would be our Title III. And this is all focused on manufactured housing. So anyone who has dealt with HUD or any federal programs has found that sometimes when it comes to manufactured housing, the federal government has not quite kept up with that in general. So the programs don't address it usually, or you're trying to find a workaround. This clears that up, or at least focuses on clearing that up. So they're looking at including more manufactured housing in our existing programs. In addition to that, we're talking about allowing for more lending for those manufactured homes through federal programs, allowing for additional financing. And then they're also going to do it's called the PRICE Act, which would be Preservation Reinvestment Initiative for Community Enhancement. This would be 7 years to provide grants to entities to maintain, protect, and stabilize manufactured housing and manufactured housing communities. Again, those are one of our more affordable types of housing, but usually federal programs have been not willing to invest in them, not willing to provide any sort of additional financing for them. So this act pretty much addressed that. When it comes to Title IV, this is all about the American dream, as it states in the act. This is about protecting borrowers, assisting families. This is about opening up capital. So at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is it's creating incentives for small dollar loan originators. Again, it's focusing on small dollar mortgages and doing some changes to the appraisal industry, and then helping more families when it comes to self-sufficiency in HUD existing housing. So really, again, it's going to be focused on that financing piece. When it comes to our next piece, it's really going to be about Title V is all about program modernization, program reform. This is all the HUD programs, all the existing housing programs that you know and use. So we're talking, and including the USDA, who does actually have housing programs. So this is just coming up with ways to make sure that those programs can offer more affordable housing. So there are some restrictions in those programs. They're taking those away. They're authorizing some changes to the disaster recovery programs. And then there's some incentives when it comes to the emergency solution grants. They're sort of waiving caps on that one. That program deals with homelessness. So at the end of the day, what they're really doing is looking at those federal programs and trying to ease the burden to create more housing. Then you're talking about Title VI. So this is back to our friends with mortgages, but it's specifically focused on the military. So this part, you're dealing with veterans, and they're trying to allow better access to capital for our veterans. So again, we're going on to our Title 7 and 8, and this is really back to that oversight and accountability. So streamlining the regulations to make it easier to create housing. So there's not much specifically with these sections that would affect our local municipalities, but I think what you're going to find is at the end of the day, if the programs are more efficient and the compliance is not as strenuous, you might be able to use these more, or the agencies within your community that are administering them can allow more access. So they're really just trying to streamline. One of the ones that I would take note of is, again, if HUD and the USDA are involved with something, sometimes HUD money is included, sometimes the USDA. Really, the compliance piece, if you do compliance for one, it should satisfy the other. Right now, that's not the case. So depending on your funding streams, you might have to do the same thing multiple times. They're really trying to get rid of those pieces that bog down development. And then we'll just jump into, again, the banking side of this. So not only do we touch on federal programs, the idea is let's touch on banking and access to capital. So there's a lot in here with respect to our banks and lending. And the idea is to just create the access to capital. And I'm not going to go into much, this isn't my area of expertise, but it will establish opportunities for more lending throughout more community banks, credit unions. So they're really trying to say, let's offer people additional opportunities to be able to finance a home. And then I will stop there and turn it over to Leah. Or I think we're going to, not Leah yet, right?
No, we'll go to Elaine. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. I was like, I'm not ready yet. No.
You did wake Leah up though, so that's good. She'll be ready to go.
I'm still ready.
All right.
Ready, Kurt.
See if I could. I did PowerPoint live, and I don't know if that was the right thing. Bear with me. Okay, there we go. All
Are you seeing it as a slide or as a show? Can you see my screen as a
Yep.
as a
it looks
as a
fine.
present? Okay.
It looks like a slide, Elaine.
Okay. Sorry, elder millennial problems. So hi everyone. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Elaine Weiss, and I'm a senior policy advisor with the National Association of Realtors. My portfolio covers federal financing and housing policy, and I've been really leading up our work around the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. And so as we celebrate its enactment into law, we also have to prepare ourselves for the implementation, because based on my experience working both at HUD and with the House Financial Services Committee, I know very personally that you could draft the most perfect piece of legislation. You've thought through all the scenarios. It is the best thing you've ever written. But if it's not implemented as well as you'd like, you're probably not going to get the outcomes that you hoped the bill would achieve. So implementation is really important. So let's talk about what we're, where we're headed. I say we're back on the road here, right? The name of the bill lends itself very well here. So let's just set some expectations of what, where we're currently at. And so the vast majority of the provisions are not self-executing, which means agencies are going to have to act through rulemaking, guidance, notices, and program design before a lot of the benefits reach communities. The law prescribes over 100 implementation actions across federal agencies, with HUD responsible for the most, making capacity and staffing key to staying on track. And that will be key as folks may have heard that, over the last year or so, a lot of federal agencies have, shed employees. And so the offices that are going to be responsible for doing the bulk of this work are just not as staffed up as they once were. And that's going to be a critical issue that we need to keep our eye on. Nearly half of all the actions are due within the first year, making early action a priority. Will the agencies be able to hit all these deadlines? I'm not so sure, but then the question is, will Congress hold them accountable to meeting their deadlines? And so there's going to be a real oversight component here from both Congress and other stakeholders like yourselves. There's, as was mentioned, there's more than a dozen new programs that were created, but these programs they weren't funded by the bill. And so they're going to need future appropriations to launch. So because the law was budget neutral and many programs carry sunset dates, that makes timely funding critically important. We don't want to run out the clock and these programs have their authorizations expire before they were even funded. So right now they only exist on paper of the bill itself. And then, full implementation could take years, but I want to uplift that there are early wins within reach. So let's not be too disheartened by the road ahead. There are real opportunities to see positive outcomes in the coming year or so. So let's get into how federal agencies will implement the law. So as I said, most of the provisions aren't self-executing. And so that means that the federal agencies, chiefly HUD, are going to have to act first and use a variety of tools that will really determine the timeline for when the impacts of this bill will be felt in communities. So the first is, and I call these like the light lift, not as intense provisions. This is the guidance and notices. These are, when you get mortgagee letters or just guidance documents, notices that implement existing authorities without doing that full rulemaking. So this is faster, and this is where I think you'll see most of the near-term actions that, no cost, low cost, just get the notice out and for stakeholders to implement, and that'll be that. The next is rulemaking. And this is when the agency determines that they need to issue, a federal rule because it meets certain criteria. And that's when you're thinking of the like, and I'll get into some examples, but things that really require some serious thought, right? And have real impact on budgets and things like that. So that's when regulations are issued through public notice and comment period. So it's a proposed rule. There's a comment period. It's typically 30 to 60 days for stakeholders to weigh in, submit their comments. We plan on doing that very much ourselves throughout this process. And then you could get a final rule. Sometimes there's an interim final rule. It just really depends on, you know, what is being commented on and the level of detail, complexity that the agency might actually try to take a second bite at the apple to get more feedback based on the, you know, after doing that initial rulemaking. And so this is the most durable path, but it's the slowest. And you're looking at like 18 to 24 months typically. And you have to factor in the fact that it's not just HUD that's weighing in this. More likely it's going to be HUD, but it's not just the federal agencies weighing in, but it's also OMB, the White House. And so all of that does is really, you know, prolong the process of these rules being finalized. And then finally, we have program design and notice of funding opportunities, or NOFOs. These are the grant programs that were mentioned, and they must be built, especially these new ones, right? So these are brand new programs. There were some that have been around. Price was, I think, had a round or two of funding, so that wouldn't be one. But these, for the most part, these programs are brand new, and the agencies are going to have to build, you know, what is the eligibility and selection criteria? What are the rules of the road for participating in the program? And then put out a notice of funding availability before any funding, to the extent Congress provides that funding, can flow. And that process can take, I think, having participated in some of that, you're looking again at around a year if you're working really, really hard to get the money out the door. So bottom line, guidance-based changes can reach communities within, I would say, about you know, the next year or so. Rulemaking is going to take a bit longer, and because the law didn't provide any funding, nothing new is going to, as far as program design and NOFOs, I don't think those are necessarily going to launch until Congress appropriates those funds, just again, given the staff capacity challenges at these agencies. So they're really going to have to triage what are the low-hanging fruit items and what are the items that they need to get done, and then where can they, you know, what are the lower priority, and that would be programs that are unfunded. So where do the provisions likely fall into this framework? And this is just our read. I know that there's a few different resources out there that like literally go through every provision that, you know, that they think it's going to be notice or rulemaking, and I don't think that there is real clarity yet on most of this. I think again we're going to be very much learning as we go throughout this process, and so it's going to really take for people to be really engaged and on top of it to make sure that we're weighing in on all the opportunities and taking, you know, advantage of those opportunities. So I think likely first, again, are those low or no cost changes that will take effect by statute or simple guidance. I think CDBG new construction is one of those. FHA multifamily loan limit increases. And then the housing choice voucher inspection flexibilities, I think we anticipate that being done through guidance rather than rulemaking, which is great. And the CDBG new construction, I think I'm really hopeful about that. You know, I've been talking about unfunded programs, but you know, that right there, you know, CDBG annually is funded at around $3 billion by Congress. And so that's almost like a new resource that communities can tap into for new construction that's already going to be funded. You know, the appropriations process dysfunctions aside, but we know that that money typically it does come every year. So that's a great opportunity for communities to access existing funding that's now for new activities. So next come the changes requiring notice and comment rulemaking. That's going to be like the home program rule changes, the manufactured housing permanent chassis removal. Those are going to require some rulemaking. And we know that, we've already heard from HUD that they are prioritizing the manufactured housing permanent chassis removal. But again, that's still going to take, 18 to 24 months, just given the process, unless they're, trying to change it in some way, which I'm not sure how they would do. Some of the USDA rulemaking, USDA actually had issued some rules prior to the bill's enactment that I'm hoping will get that they're actually in the near future, rather than in the 18 to 24 months, having to do with properties that can be financed with ADUs or can be more easily assumed. So USDA actually, and this isn't just USDA, I'm hoping that there was some level of anticipation on the part of the agencies to start doing the legwork ahead of time on some of these provisions, especially some of these provisions that have been long debated or discussed as potential opportunities for modernizing these programs. But again, it's really going to depend on staff capacity. And then again, last are those new competitive programs that must be designed and funded. So we're talking about the Innovation Fund and those affordable housing planning and implementation grants and whole home repair. So in short, low-hanging fruit first, rulemaking, dependent changes over the next few years, and then new programs only as funding really materializes. So then I just wanted folks to be aware of some upcoming deadlines and requirements. So for the manufactured housing provision in the bill, it required that states certify that they are treating a manufactured home built without a chassis the same as it would one that is built on a chassis. States that have annual legislatures like Pennsylvania, they need to certify that by July 11th, 2027. So folks in the state should be, getting on that and making sure that that certification is in place. And then the other provision I'd like to flag as, a near-term deadline, the bill requires that CDBG grantees maintain an inventory of publicly loaned land. This has to be a publicly accessible database. The bill itself says this needs to be in place, that this goes into effect on October 1, 2026, but don't panic. It really goes into effect when a CDBG grantee has to, when they're signing their grant agreement, they have to certify that they're meeting certain conditions to receive that grant, and maintaining the database is one of those conditions. So really this deadline is when you go and certify or you're about to sign that grant agreement. I believe that HUD is working with the grantees now on this current grant cycle. So whenever the next grant cycle is, when Congress provides those fiscal year 27 funds, I think that's when this provision really kicks in, and that October 1 deadline isn't really applicable, because it really comes down to when you're certifying that you're meeting the requirements, not this other date. So things that you could be doing right now, I always think it's important to tell folks how they can get involved and be helpful. So weigh in during rulemaking, comment on proposed rules as agencies implement, where much of the detail gets decided, as we talked about. Again, we're planning on taking every opportunity to weigh in on these rulemaking that comes out, and so definitely it's such a great way for people to share their thoughts, especially practitioners on the ground who have that real world experience of how these programs work or don't work. And so that's the type of feedback that HUD really needs, or the agencies really need. HUD and USDA and Treasury, they are going to need this information to make sure that the rules are really meeting the moment and are being modernized where they need to be, just given that we know it's been a while since these programs have been reauthorized. And it's not just rulemaking, it's engaging on that guidance and program design too. A lot of the consequential calls happen through these informal processes, not just formal notice and comment. So it's important that, to the extent that you have connections with, the HUD field offices or your local USDA office, you should be reaching out to that staff and talking to them as well. Part of the act included this creating a task force, a housing frameworks task force that HUD will be convening. And that task force is going to be made of state and local officials, planning boards, and home builders to develop voluntary model frameworks for local housing reform, particularly around zoning. So we're still learning. We haven't yet learned how folks can get involved, but that's something you should be keeping an eye on as well. I can't emphasize this point enough around the federal funding. We need to be pressing lawmakers to fund these new programs, since again, most of them have tight deadlines, right? And so if we don't get them funded, HUD's not, and USC, I think all the grant programs are at HUD. HUD is not necessarily going to be writing the rules for programs that are not funded. So it's really critically important that we be pressing our lawmakers to be weighing in, putting in those appropriations requests with the House and Senate Appropriations Committee come March, April, requesting that funding for those programs. And then at the same time as requesting funding for those new programs, urging adequate staffing and capacity at HUD and USDA so they can meet their deadlines. It really takes having people in these buildings to get this work out the door, and we need to be emphasizing that. And then finally, I would just say states and localities, they should be separating what their legal implementation deadlines are from these unfunded program opportunities. Again, if you need to triage where you're putting your energy, I think it's really about what folks need to do, or these other rulemaking processes rather than these unfunded program opportunities at the moment. And I think that is my slides. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. So Elaine, I know when you and I were talking, setting this up, you'd said like the passage of the act is really just the first step. So I think we can see it there. A lot of work to be done, but I think some practical guidance there for everyone on the call too. If this stuff's important to you, there's a role for us to play to advocate for with our federal and local delegation to make sure that these programs actually become a reality.
And I'll just add, we pulled together a state and local impact document that we will hopefully be out later today. And I'm happy to share that with Kirk, who could share it with all of you, of just that really lays out a lot of what I talked about.
Hey, thanks, Elaine. So now, Leah, we'll turn it over to you. Everybody's kind of jazzed up now. We know about the act. We know how the stuff's going to get done. Now we need to know what's our municipal partners be doing.
Super. So I am just gonna share my screen. Let me know when you guys can see it.
Yep, it's up there.
Super. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what can we do as municipalities here in Central PA, across Pennsylvania. So for those who don't know me, although I recognize most names of the people on this call, which is awesome to see everyone, I am the executive director of Dauphin County Housing Authority, but my background is in planning. So I am a proud alumni of Tri-County Regional Planning Commission. I think there's a lot of us also on this call, but I'm also the president of the American Planning Association Pennsylvania chapter, where I've spent a lot of my time doing legislative work, getting this Roads to Housing Act passed in DC, and worked with APA on that. So I want to talk about sort of that marriage between housing and planning. And as Kirk mentioned, it's sort of an enigma in planning, because is it planning? Is it something different? And I think there's a lot of lines that it crosses. So I think it's really important that we talk about them. So I think listening to Mary and to Aileen about what we've talked about, being prepared is really what's going to set municipalities apart. So I'm going to go through some questions, if this is going to work, that a lot of people have asked about what this federal policy is going to look like. So the first thing is that local zoning authority remains unchanged. There's going to be some examples of best practices. There's going to be guidance, but there is no sort of plan or expectation that preemption is going to occur at the federal level. So I think municipalities should take a deep breath and should not prepare for authority to be removed from their participation. And I think that's really important. the next one is shifting towards readiness and housing readiness specifically. But as we know, when we've talked about housing in the past, it's not about housing. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Housing also means infrastructure, transportation, workforce development. It means everything. So we want to be rewarding those municipalities who are ready to be a part of this conversation. And the last thing, like I've said, is focus on that preparation, not reaction. In Pennsylvania, it's really hard for us to be prepared from a zoning perspective for all the changes that happen, because it just takes a long time for us to do to make changes, to update. Also, sometimes we just don't know what's coming. So, but this is a really great opportunity. We do know what's coming, so we can be involved and we can get ready for what that looks like. So overall, number one, housing planning will matter more than ever. So you need to know what you have now. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what your community has? Update your comprehensive plans now. Don't wait until the act come out, because the act isn't going to tell you what you need in your community. You know that best. So update that now. Don't rely on the vision that your community may have had 10, 15, 20 years ago, because as we all know, that's different and it changes. Identify places where housing locations could make sense in the future, and then plan for all the changing of our diversity of the demographics, seniors, workforce housing, family, ownership opportunities, because those are going to be the things that set you apart from other communities. So expect guidance on local land use, but don't expect preemption and authority. So the supply frameworks are going to help define those best practices. And even if you're doing your updating now, that's not going to stop you from using those best practices in the future. And likely that guidance is going to influence the funding decision. So as Mary talked about the changes in home and CDBG, those conversations are happening now, but those the changes that you can make today can really align with the future. Also, the state housing plan that was just launched at the end of last year has a lot of the same sort of themes in them, is being housing ready. They haven't really defined what that means yet, so we're hoping that there's some clarity there to help municipalities understand. But evaluate the sort of barriers to development, predictability in your process. How is the housing distributed across your municipality, and approval timelines? Aligning all of those things will make your community sort of a focus for development that wants to come in, because they know what they're going to get out of it. So the review of development will become really important, and this is really focused on the permitting. Review your permitting process and subdivision land development process. Does it make sense for your municipality? Does it take an excessive amount of time? Do you have the capacity to make changes and allow for a faster process, an administrative process? Use that really great staff that you have in municipalities that have that resource. Use them. They're your eyes and ears. Is it predictable? Does it change? Because I've heard a lot of complaints, and I will say now I do housing development, so I do play a little bit of the other side of that sort of zoning coin, as I'm now on the other side applying to build housing. If you change your process midstream, I get frustrated, right? And I'm going to take my money and my development and I might go somewhere else to your neighbor. And maybe that's what you want, but maybe it's not. So being upfront, being predictable is going to make sure that this development process comes through faster. And that's also what we're hearing in this rulemaking and from this grant opportunities, is if you have this predictability and simplification of the permitting process, you could align yourself better to be more grant ready. So redevelopment is going to become a major housing strategy. We have so much redevelopment possibility here in Central PA. You as a municipality should start identifying vacant commercial buildings, underutilized shopping centers, former schools, office buildings not being used, industrial properties that are ready for conversion. Create an inventory now. so that when it comes time to do this, you can speak thoughtfully to developers coming in. They're going to come in and meet with you and say, hey, what do you have? And you can say, hey, here's what I have. Does this align with what you're looking for? And you're going to be received much better from that development community. You can also be a little bit more on the forefront of grant application if you're already prepared for these for this redevelopment plan. So coordinate housing and infrastructure. I know I'm preaching to the choir in municipalities who know this already, but I think sometimes we assume that everybody knows what that means and we don't. So align the future housing plans with water, sewer, transportation, planning, expansion, capacity. Coordinate municipal, local capital improvement programs and processes, and use this integrated planning approach to strengthen your competitiveness as a municipality. So having sort of your ducks in a row shows that you are ready to enact and you're ready to be a part of this future housing conversation. So as we talked, these funding opportunities are likely to expand, which is great. I think CDBG and Home have really great, they've been a backbone of our redevelopment of our communities, our bridges, a lot of our sewer and water infrastructure have been driven by CDBG. And the ongoing question is housing infrastructure? Congress talked about this years ago. I think there's still a lot of conversation on is it or is it not, but the expansion of some of these programs would really show that it is, because using CDBG Home and using them for planning and for housing is going to greatly impact the on-the-ground resources that we have, because so much money flows through the state and the counties and those who get a direct allocation to really create impacts. So talk in your community. Are there projects that you know in your head that you want to get done? Make them grant ready. So as soon as the HUD and the federal government make these decisions, you're the first one in line. Because I will tell you what, the pot ends and you don't want to be the last one in line. So be ready. Build the partnerships with local developers, with local businesses, with your water and sewer companies if they're not an authority outside of in your municipality. Build those partnerships now. Talk about what your goals and objectives are for your community now, so when it comes time to start this process, you're already aligned and ready to work together. So really, what should you do? Planning. Talk about the comprehensive plan. Work on your comprehensive plan. I can't tell you how many times I've picked up a plan in a community that's 8 to 12 years old and they said, well, that's not really what we want anymore. Okay, well then change it. Okay, don't just talk about what you might want. Have the conversations, use the resources you have, and I will plug county planning agencies. They're really great resources to help you make these decisions if you don't have the capacity inside your municipality. Use them to help you. Create and complete a housing needs assessment. What does your community need based on your population today? There's a lot of forecasting tools that exist now that can help make these plans really data centered so that we can really see what's coming forward. And as I mentioned before, identify redevelopment and infill opportunities. Zoning, which I know is everybody's favorite topic. I go to sleep reading zoning and dreaming about it. But review your residential districts. Where can you modernize your residential districts to make it make sense for your community? Evaluate whether your current regulations are unintentionally limiting housing options. And then modernizing is not the same as it's deregulating. And I want to be very clear about that. So modernize those, the zoning practices. So to create modern development standards. We do not develop the way we did 30 years ago. We just don't. Technology has improved and changed. Processes have improved and changed. Make sure that your zoning ordinance is staying up with that. Look at the review of your development, your permitting timeline. Get rid of anything that's unnecessary, that's holding up process, and then create that predictability that I talked about earlier. Obviously, redevelopment and do that inventory, identify adaptive reuse opportunities, coordinate with housing authorities and redevelopment authorities and county planning agencies, because we do this work all day, every day, and we would love to be asked before you're already down the line and then you come and ask us, because that does happen and we get it, but ask us first, right? We want to be involved in these conversations. And then funding, obviously, is the big final thing. Monitor what's happening in the rulemaking, participate in the rulemaking. It's one of those things that if you don't tell them what your concerns are, they cannot understand them. So participate in that, evaluate how the CDBG and home changes could support local priorities, and then prepare projects for this future innovation fund and planning grant opportunities. So overall, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of key takeaways. There's still a lot to be done because there's a lot of potential changes that we don't even know about yet. So keep an eye on it. But I guess, make sure, and the last bullet point on this, I think I've said it 8 times, so I think that's enough, but be prepared, because prepared communities are really going to have an advantage once the rulemaking is done. Because if you start when the rulemaking is done, you'll be years behind the curve, and we want to make sure that we're in front of it. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. That great game plan. Wow. I mean, I think you really covered a lot of ground there, and the advice for municipalities. I really like that last point of, the prepared communities are the ones that are going to succeed. And I have a saying too, get what you want or take what you get. So communities figure out what you want and get it. Otherwise, you're going to be taking what you get. And we've seen that. I know you've seen that. Others have seen that in communities that are just sitting back, letting things happen. A lot of times it doesn't turn out too well for you. So getting those plans done in advance, working with your zoning ordinance, looking to the federal level, seeing what these programs are, moving that ahead for a community is very important. So with that, we'll open it up to questions for the group. So there's a couple in the chat now. Will the slide deck be shared and be recording? Yes, everything will be shared on the Cumberland County's Planning Department's YouTube page, and I'll be sending a link out to everybody. It's called Planning in Plain Sight. A lot of good resources on there. In addition to this, some other videos and stuff. We have some contemporary issues going on in the planning world. So appreciate everyone checking those out, and also giving us a like or a subscribe. We always appreciate those. Other questions, feel free to put in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, that's fine too. Anyone? Okay, there's John. Thanks, John. John has a question there. Are there any examples of modern zoning in the state, and what does that look like? Knowing that is a loaded question, how will this federal grant funding change or influence community character, and will that forever change communities due to reliance on federal funding? Great question. Who wants to take that? Leah, sounds like it's for you.
Since I talked about zoning and said I dream about it, I guess I'll talk about it. Yeah. So there are some really great examples. Montgomery County has a couple model ordinances that they've worked on, some housing zoning resources. There's also some guidance on the housing accelerator on American Planning Association's websites, and I can share those links with Kirk to get out to everyone. But I think your question is fair, and I think one, we don't know if it's going to change our reliance on the federal government, but for funding, but I think in a lot of municipalities, we already are reliant on the federal funding that trickles through the state and then comes to us or state budgets. Our municipal budgets are so wrapped up in the operations of municipalities that sometimes planning takes a back burner to those critical functions that you all have, police departments, and all of those life safety things that everyone pops in their head as more important than planning. And as a person who lives in a community, I get it. But also as a planner, these resources are going to be critical to align your municipality to be successful in the future. You got to think about the other side of the coin. Housing is tax base. Are you able to bring in people to your community that are going to open businesses, that are going to create an extension of your business district, you know, and those are the types of conversations that are really important to have now, because if that's what you want to align your community for, you need to make sure your regulatory framework will allow for that.
Great. Okay, other questions?
Come on, people, you have to have questions.
I'll throw one out there while we're waiting. So for any of our panelists, which do you believe, is there a special part of the act that you find is going to be a major opportunity, or one that you think will be particularly challenging?
I think, again, for me, one of the great new opportunities I really think is the CDBG new construction flexibility that's been provided, because again, that's money that's funded every year for, you know, $3 billion, that communities can really now tap into that and put that money to work. And that gets to what Leah was saying about looking at your consolidated plan processes and making sure that you're setting yourself up to be able to use that new flexibility. So I think that to me is one of the provisions that I really think is a big deal.
Okay, looks like, okay, we're getting warmed up on the chat here. Everybody's warmed up here. So Heather Tidwell had asked, are we seeing more local partners go for the HUD research opportunities?
So I can tell you in Dauphin County, we have not seen a lot of that. I have heard that a lot of larger institutions in Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh area in Pennsylvania are going through for the grants, but I have not seen anything here. But that's me. I don't know. There could be. I hope so.
Other questions anyone has? Oh, there we go. So Mitch Shaws from Carlisle Borough, are there any implications that this bill will have on planning housing around transit and other forms of affordable transportation?
Leah, do you want to take that?
Sure. So I mean, I think the answer is yes, because I think while it might not have a direct requirement for it, it's going to align with that housing ready strategy. And is your community prepared for an increase in housing? And I think it's going to lean towards affordable transportation options, because obviously, you know, I think we all talked about this in our conversations, is housing is not a sole purpose. You need to, you know, work on that community development. I don't know if there's anything specific. I've not heard anything directly in the rulemaking that's going to say transportation, but I think it's going to be an overall sort of perspective of how communities are evaluated as a whole.
So I could say, unfortunately, because of congressional jurisdiction issues, there was a transit-oriented development piece that sadly fell out because it was in somebody else's jurisdiction, not the Senate Banking and House Financial Services Committee jurisdiction. So that's no longer in there. But I think there are, as Leah said, pieces that will get at that. I think the Innovation Fund, whenever that's set up, will include things around transit-oriented development. I think the CDBG requirement around the public land database will be a really great tool for communities and stakeholders to see what land is available for development, especially around transit hubs. You know, I think there's real opportunity there, but people just don't know exactly where that land is. So I think that there are these smaller pieces that can be helpful in getting that transit-oriented development off the ground.
Okay. Gail Gallo has a question about, do you know if there will be updates to stormwater requirements on new development, that those requirements have become a significant factor in cost for home builders and buyers?
So we have not seen anything in this act, particularly. A lot of that comes from the state. I can tell you that in the state housing plan, there is conversation about specific state agencies that are holding up or adding cost to development. And I think you'll see more of that conversation come out of the housing plan results. I would say reach out to state DCD and have that conversation where and share your concerns there, because that's, I think, you'll see that trickle out.
Elaine, Ed from Dauphin County, I think this would probably be for you. What government red tape and restrictions will we be facing to applying for these grants?
Time will tell, right? But I'd like to think, just given in the spirit of the act, that there won't be as much red tape as there has been in the past. That would be rather ironic. But I think, again, it's those requirements that you're going to have to meet, right? Do you have partnerships? What has your community done to reduce barriers to housing supply that are going to take real action that, your community has done or has already taken that? As Leah said, it's those sorts of things that to get ahead of now. But I think it's always, with federal grant funding, there is always going to be some red tape, just given, the source of the funding. But, time will tell just how heavy-handed they are. There has been some real challenges with federal grant funding as of late, just given some of the moves that this administration has taken around input from the White House and OMB. And so I think that that's something that we're looking out for as well.
Mark Carpenter has a good question about infrastructure. So are there any planned funding for expansion of infrastructure like sewer and water, utilities, or fiber optics to help support increased housing demand?
So I believe some of the rule changes under the HOME program will allow communities to use home funding specifically for this purpose, to the extent that they don't receive CDBG funding. I believe that is a provision, but there is some funding opportunities within the bill to use the funding for infrastructure. I think the Innovation Fund is another one of those opportunities where you can use it to build that infrastructure to support the housing that you're planning.
Okay. Cara Mockmer from Silver Spring asks, is there an LMI map readily available for Cumberland County municipalities? And we'll broaden that to Dauphin. I'm sure they'll cover Dauphin County as well.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I was going to say I'll share that with Kirk, and you could disperse it to all your municipalities. But there's a map available, and public resources too. But we'll get that all listed out for everyone and share it.
And then Greg Welker made mention here. I actually had a note to mention this when we're talking about redevelopment as being a component of the new Housing Act. I know CADIC has been working with the planning department here. We have an EPA brownfields assessment grant. So we're going out looking at communities to inventory brownfield sites, doing some phase 1 and phase 2s on those. So you really can see kind of a couple forces coming together here, that if your community is interested in some of this housing stuff, you also have brownfields or redevelopment sites. It's a great opportunity to get ready. Like Leah was saying, the communities that are prepared will succeed the most. So you'll be hearing from county planning. You'll also be hearing from CADIC here in Cumberland County about our inventory efforts. So definitely participate in that. Look for opportunities to get some properties in that pipeline already, and we can see what we can do with them to get them ready for housing or other types of uses in the future. And then Ed had a follow-up on his second part of his question on red tape. How can we navigate the application process to make it easy to get funded?
So I know when I was at HUD, and I don't know if they're still doing this, they would have office hours to help grantees understand and navigate the different NOFOs that they had put out. They would do webinars to stakeholders. And so hopefully there's some of that is being provided by the agencies to help people, tap into these applications and grant funds.
Okay, we've reached the end of our time. I really want to thank our participants. This was an excellent program. I know I've learned a lot. That act is big. There's a lot to be there, but I think Mary gave an excellent overview of what's in it. Elaine, I think now we have a better understanding of where we're headed, how long it'll take, and what we need to do to help get some of those programs over the goal line. And Leah, thank you for the update on municipalities, what they need to do to get ready. So I think if everyone kind of takes a look at this, get your communities ready. Another plug for our county planning agencies. I know, speaking for Andrew and my department, we stand ready to help municipalities to make some of this stuff a reality, whether it be planning or zoning assistance. We see this stuff coming. It's a need definitely in our region. So thank you everyone for attending. We look forward to in the future hosting some other programs like this to keep you abreast of everything that's going on in our community. So thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.